The story of the Black Dahlia begins not with a death, but with a life full of hope and ambition. A life that would become tragically overshadowed by its brutal and unsolved ending. Elizabeth Short, a young woman from a small town in Massachusetts, dreamed of a life far from her modest beginnings. She was born on July 29, 1924, in the city of Hyde Park, just outside Boston, to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her childhood was marked by the Great Depression and a significant family trauma. When she was just a young girl, her father, Cleo, seemingly drove his car off a bridge in what was widely believed to be a suicide attempt, though he survived. This event cast a long shadow, and Elizabeth, who was a fragile child, developed severe asthma and bronchitis, conditions that would follow her throughout her short life. She was a pretty girl, wheat pale skin, intense blue eyes, and glossy, jet black hair, which she meticulously styled in the fashion of the movie stars she so admired. Her parents' marriage, however, did not survive the strain of the Depression and the aftermath of her father's incident, and they separated, with Elizabeth moving with her mother to Medford, Massachusetts. As a teenager, her life took a turn that would set her on a path across the country. She won a contest and was crowned Medford's prettiest girl, a small-town accolade that likely fueled her larger aspirations. In pursuit of a healthier climate for her asthma, she spent a winter in Miami, Florida, but her real goal, like so many thousands in that era, was the glittering promise of Hollywood, California. She wanted to be in the movies, not necessarily as a great actress, for she had no formal training, but perhaps as a starlet, to be seen and admired, to escape the ordinary and find the glamour and security that had eluded her in her early years. Elizabeth's journey to California was not a direct one. It was a meandering path over several years. A series of stops and starts that saw her moving between the east and west coasts, living for periods in places like Vallejo, California, and Santa Barbara, and even spending time in an army hospital in Florida, not as a patient, but working as a clerk, surrounded by the young soldiers who would become a frequent part of her social life. She was often described as charming and beautiful, but also as something of a dreamer, someone who embellished stories about herself, sometimes claiming her husband was an Air Force pilot who had been killed in the war, earning her a sympathetic and romantic aura as a war widow, a story that was entirely untrue. She formed relationships with men easily, but they often did not last, and she seemed to drift, never finding a stable foothold. She finally settled in Los Angeles in the summer of 1946, a time of post-war optimism and upheaval, a city where dreams were manufactured and broken every day. She lived in various rooming houses, including one at the Hawthorne Grill in Hollywood, and spent her days, much like other young hopefuls, visiting drugstore counters, movie studios, casting offices, and clubs, always dressed impeccably in black, her favorite color. A choice that, in hindsight, would later seem grimly prophetic. It was during this time that she acquired the nickname that would become forever linked with her tragedy. The origin is somewhat debated, but it is generally believed to have come from a combination of her black hair and clothing, and the then popular film, The Blue Dahlia, a noir murder mystery starring Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. A shopkeeper or a friend supposedly started calling her the Black Dahlia as a play on the movie's title, and the name stuck, used by those in her social circle. She was not a famous person, not by any means. She was one of countless young women in Hollywood, beautiful and anonymous, trying to make a future for herself. The last confirmed days of Elizabeth Short's life are a patchwork of witness statements and fleeting sightings, pieces of a puzzle that have never fully fit together. In early January 1947, she had been dating a man named Gordon Ficklin, a salesman and former Army pilot. But that relationship was cooling. Around January 8th, she traveled south to San Diego with a girlfriend. And it was there that she met a man named Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman. Manley was smitten with her, and on January 8th, he drove her from San Diego back to Los Angeles. They spent the night of January 8th together in a motel, but Manley would later insist their relationship was platonic and that he was just helping her get back to the city. The following day, January 9th, he drove her to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, located at 506 South Grand Avenue. She told him she was meeting her sister, who was visiting from Berkeley, a story that was also untrue. Witnesses saw her in the lobby of the Biltmore, waiting, seemingly for someone. T-sighting, around 6:30 p.m., on January 9, 1947, is the last time Elizabeth Short was seen alive by any reliable witness. What happened between that moment in the elegant lobby of the Biltmore and the discovery of her body less than a week later is the central, terrifying mystery of the case. She vanished completely, leaving behind her suitcase at the bus depot, a clue that suggested she had not planned to disappear. The horror was revealed on the morning of January 15, 1947. Mother named Betty Berzinger was walking with her young daughter in a largely undeveloped area near Crenshaw Boulevard, in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, a place known then as a vacant lot at 3800 South Norton Avenue. At first, from a distance, she thought she saw a broken store mannequin discarded in the weeds. As she drew closer, the terrible truth became apparent. It was not a mannequin. It was the body of a young woman, severed completely in half at the waist. The two halves of her body had been placed about a foot apart, posed deliberately with her arms raised over her head and her legs spread wide apart. The scene was one of unimaginable brutality and chilling precision. The body had been meticulously cleaned, drained of blood, and washed, giving the skin a ghostly white appearance that contrasted starkly with the dirt and grass. The killer had mutilated the corpse horrifically, carving a grotesque Arthur Glasgow smile into her face, a permanent, gruesome grin. The body showed evidence of having been tied down, with rope marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, indicating she had been restrained for a prolonged period, likely while she was still alive. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhage and shock from the blows to her face and the deep lacerations. The autopsy revealed she had been severely beaten, with multiple fractures to her skull, face, and ribs. The cutting of her body in half had been done with surgical precision after death, and the killer had removed certain internal organs. The sheer level of violence, the clean, clinical cuts, and the theatrical posing of the body suggested a killer with a deep-seated rage, possibly some medical or butchering knowledge, and a desire to shock and taunt the public and the police. The identification of the victim was swift. The fingerprints were taken and run through the records, and they matched those taken when Elizabeth Short had applied for a job as a clerk at the Army Post Exchange in Camp Cook, California, in 1943. Once her identity was established, the press, particularly the Los Angeles Examiner, seized upon the story with a voraciousness that was unprecedented. It was the Examiner that first published the nickname Black Dahlia, and the name immediately captured the public's imagination, transforming a local murder into a national sensation. The story had everything: a beautiful young victim, a Hollywood connection, and a level of savagery that was both terrifying and fascinating. Newspapers competed fiercely for scoops, and this competition would soon play a direct and bizarre role in the investigation. The police, led by the Los Angeles Police Department, were inundated with tips and potential suspects, a deluge of information that would both help and hopelessly complicate the case. The investigation into the murder of Elizabeth Short became one of the largest and most sprawling in the history of Los Angeles, generating tens of thousands of pages of reports and involving hundreds of officers over the years. The police investigation began with the people who knew Elizabeth Short best. Robert Red Manley, the last person known to have seen her alive, was immediately considered a prime suspect. He was questioned extensively and even took a lie detector test. He had a solid alibi for the time after he dropped her off. And while he was initially held, the police found no concrete evidence linking him to the murder, and he was eventually released. Other men in her life were investigated, including Gordon Fickling and a man named Mark Hansen, a theater owner who had shown her some attention and whom she had sometimes lived with in a platonic arrangement. Dozens of other men she had dated or been seen with were tracked down and cleared. The police also pursued the theory that the killer had some form of medical knowledge due to the precise nature of the dismemberment. This led them to investigate hundreds of doctors, surgeons, and medical students, as well as butchers and slaughterhouse workers. Every lead, no matter how slight, was pursued, but none yielded the killer. The case took a truly strange turn just days after the murder when the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper, and soon after the Los Angeles Herald Express, received a series of communications from someone claiming to be the killer. The first was a phone call to the city desk of the Examiner, with a male voice stating, "You're going to get the Black Dahlia's belongings." Then, on January 24th, a package arrived at the Examiner's office. It contained Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, photographs of her with various men, an address book, and a note cut out from newspaper and magazine letters that read, "Here are Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The address book had a page, torn out, a detail the press did not initially publish. The items had been carefully cleaned, as the body had been, with gasoline or a similar solvent to remove fingerprints. This was a direct taunt from the murderer, engaging in a macabre dialogue with the press. The police used this communication as a potential trap. They asked the newspapers to publish a message from the Black Dahlia Avenger, as the killer had signed one note, stating he was too hot and would give himself up. They hoped this would lure him into another communication where they could catch him. It worked, to a degree. More letters and postcards arrived. But the killer proved elusive. The most significant piece of evidence from these communications was a letter sent to the Herald Express that contained the missing page from the address book. This page had the name Mark Hansen on it, the theater owner, further directing suspicion his way, though he too was eventually cleared. The handwriting on the envelopes and the cutout letters were analyzed by experts, but this led to a multitude of suspects, not one definitive person. The sheer volume of false confessions that flooded the police department was another major obstacle. Over the years, more than 500 people have confessed to the murder of the Black Dahlia. Almost all of them ruled out as mentally unstable or seeking attention. The investigation was being choked by too much information, much of it useless or deliberately misleading. The conclusive, the surgical nature of the crime, the clean body, the posed scene, the taunting letters pointed to a highly organized, intelligent, and sadistic individual who had likely planned the murder carefully and knew how to cover his tracks. As the initial frenzy of the investigation died down without an arrest, the Black Dahlia case slowly moved from a current event to a legendary unsolved mystery. Over the decades, countless theories have been proposed, and numerous individuals have been put forward as the likely killer by authors, detectives, and amateur sleuths. One of the most persistent suspects was Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician. Years after the murder, his own son, a former LAPD detective named Steve Hodel, became convinced of his father's guilt, based on photographs found in his father's album that bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short, as well as tape recordings where Dr. Hodel made cryptic and incriminating statements. George Hodel was a brilliant but morally corrupt man who was investigated for the murder in 1949, but the district attorney at the time deemed the evidence insufficient for prosecution. Steve Hodel's theory is that his father, who had surgical knowledge and a history of abusing women, was not only the Black Dahlia killer, but also responsible for other murders. A theory that remains controversial, but has gained significant traction. Another suspect was Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived near the vacant lot where the body was found, though there is little direct evidence connecting him to the crime. A man named Joseph DeMay, a butcher who confessed to the crime, but later recanted, was also investigated. More recently, a theory presented in a book suggested that the killer was a man named Jack Anderson Wilson, a known criminal and forger. But this theory also lacks conclusive proof. The list of suspects is long and convoluted, a testament to the enduring fascination with the case, and the desperate desire to put a name to the monster who committed such a horrifying act. The legacy of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, is a tragic and complex one. In death, she achieved a fame she never found in life, but it is a fame defined by violence and mystery. She has been the subject of numerous books, films, songs, and television shows, often portrayed as a femme fatale or a symbol of Hollywood's dark underbelly. In reality, she was a young woman with dreams, flaws, and a life that was cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. The investigation remains officially open with the Los Angeles Police Department, though it is considered cold. The evidence, including the killer's taunting letters, is still preserved. The murder of the Black Dahlia continues to haunt the American consciousness because it represents the ultimate unsolved puzzle, a crime of such extreme cruelty, committed with such brazenness, that the identity of the killer remains a secret, a ghost from a past that refuses to be laid to rest. The vacant lot on South Norton Avenue is long gone, replaced by houses. But the story of what happened there on a January morning in 1947 endures as a stark reminder of a darkness that can hide behind the sunniest of facades.